All right, thank you. It's nice to have heard throughout the conference all the reference to education and outreach, new approaches to do that. I'm a lifelong educator. I've taught kindergarten through 12th grade and even at the college level for over 20 years. And I just feel like what we're thinking about here is really important. This is our future. So I'm going to dive into this conifer distribution stuff that I've been obsessed with because I was a teacher and I'd have summers off and what do I do? And I'd run around in the mountains. And I was inspired by Todd's work on research natural areas and also the work of John Sawyer and Dale Thornburg at Humboldt State University to really explore and get to know the conifers of the Klamath Mountains a little bit better. And thankfully, Julie Evans has taken me under her wing as well with the vegetation team at CNPS, and we've got to work on small projects like this. So, is it really California's rarest conifer? I'm not sure, but I think I might make the case for it today. All right, so here is a distribution map of Callitropsis nootkatensis. You can see it reaches the southern extent of its range here in the Klamath. There's a little bit more specific map up here, Northwest California. There are several disjunct populations, most of which are probably going to wink out in the next 20 to 50 years. This one's down to about 3 or 4% of what it was 20 years ago. It's also having a hard time where it's expanded north in the Holocene here because of a recent decreased snowpack. And that's really why we instigated some of these mapping efforts. So I'm not going to go into too much of this. It's very complicated taxonomic information that even I have a hard time discerning. But basically, it's gone through several name changes with the new discoveries in Asia of Xanthan Cypress, gone back and forth between Cypress, but I'm sticking with this monotypic Callitropsis, at least monotypic in North America. Okay, most similar in the Klamath Mountains and generally overlaps in range with Cypress nootkatensis are near endemic, beautiful Port Orford cedar. And here's the range of Port Orford cedar, and basically right along the Siskiyou Crest in here is where those, well, I'll show you the population centers of Callitropsis, but that's where they overlap with, where it overlaps with Cypress. These are all images and maps from my book, Conifers of the Pacific Slope. So this is a spot in the Siskiyous where we have Callitropsis nootkatensis right next to Cypress, Lawsoniana. You can really see that difference in the foliage and form. Some other differences, the Cypress has the butterfly stomata, or not the butterfly stomata, the stomata in the form of an X, and then this, to me, looks like more armored. This is the Callitropsis. And seed cones also, generally more, it's between 6 and 9 scales and fewer than 6 in Callitropsis. So you really got to work these things out in the Klamath. As you move further north, Callitropsis is not really confused with anything, confusable with anything. But what is confusing is that Callitropsis and Cupressus macrocarpa or Hespercyprus macrocarpa have been crossed, and the very popular ornamental Leyland cypress has come from that, which is now spread all over the United States and beyond. So it has that ability to interbreed with the cypresses of California. All right, so here is our working area. All of these stands are in wilderness areas besides these 2 in Oregon, which we actually have not collected any data on. This is all within the Siskiyou Wilderness, and then these 2 populations are within the Red Buttes Wilderness. And so far, all of this is on the Klamath National Forest. Julie Evans did find 1 tree on the 6 rivers last summer. But I expect we will find a few trees on the 6 rivers in the near future. So this is work with Julie and the vegetation team. Like I said, Aaron Lonergan has helped fund us through the Klamath, Lisa Hoover and the 6 rivers, and then Brian Booma, who was at Alaska Anchorage. He's moved to Colorado somewhere now, but he is the sort of the yellow-cedar of the north guy, and he got us going on some ideas for long-term monitoring because of that decline. So the project, what do we do? Well, we want to map all the stands in California's Klamath Mountains. We're going to, basically we've conducted, so far I think 33 rapid assessments. There'll be more this summer. And last summer, Julie and I visited the southernmost stand, or was that 2 summers ago? The southernmost stand and set up a belt transect based on the work that Brian suggested we model that after. Okay, so I teach a lot of math estimation in my day job. So I thought I'd see if anybody has any guesses. What do you think the average stand size of what I am calling California's rarest conifer is in California in hectares? Anybody have a guess? Somebody be brave. Say it again. About the size. So that's a hectare. I just want to give you an idea. That's a hectare. The average size of the stands in California. 1/5 of a hectare. All right, pretty good. So 0.22 hectares is what the data is showing us. So pretty darn small. And then within California, there are 11 hectares of yellow cedar. So this is what we found so far. I'm going to dive into this and a little bit of how we've found this. So here's all of the stands. There's 44 that we've identified so far. These 3 at the bottom I'll show you in a second. We actually have not been to, so I've just thrown in some holding pattern numbers there. The largest stand in California is on the north slopes of Preston Peak, and I'll show you that in a second. And look at that, 2.4 hectares. So that is, you know, what, over 20, probably 25% there. And a little bit less than 25% of all the yellow cedar are in that one stand. And then these, like I said, these 3 have not been visited. I'll get there this summer. And then there's one more that I just got an email about last week that is in one of the most remote places in the Siskiyou Wilderness, probably around the same size as those stands. So there's still some to be discovered. Okay, so how do we get this? Well, Preston Peak, that is the heart of the Siskiyou Wilderness, and that is the heart of yellow cedar country in California. So this is some of what the habitat looks like for yellow cedar. So this is sort of a west, northwest facing slope. And here's a view from Google Earth. So I took that picture from Rattlesnake Meadow, kind of looking up into that gap. So here are the stands up on Preston Peak. There's also some stands on that north slope, on the other angled slope there, and I'll show you in a second. It's kind of weird. It's got this fin that kind of comes out and creates this north-facing habitat in that bowl, even though it appears to be a south-facing slope. So let's zoom in there, and here's what it looks like from up above. Here's one of the summits of Preston. Preston actually has 2 different summits, but here are the little thickets of yellow cedar. They're mixing with brewer spruce, Abies procera, a couple other conifer, actually Taxus brevifolia is in there. And here's a shot of that thicket from below. So they grow in these very dense stands, and typically on the edge is where you'll find the Abies procera. All right, so this is a little hard to see. I realized this last night, but I couldn't redo these images. But I've kind of highlighted the boundaries of these different stands. You can see that stand size varies. And so what I've done, this is a very dense thicket. This actually, I bushwhacked through it, and I almost could have been stuck in there forever, it seemed, at a few points. And then other spots, it's much more thinly dispersed because of the size of the bedrock. So what I've done, if we zoom in on that a little bit, is I've sort of quantified, so I've taken that square meters and I've adjusted for percent cover. And so you can see this is about 80% cover. This is probably a little bit less than 40, but I went ahead and went with 40. And that's how I've adjusted for the hectare size within those polygons that we've drawn. This one is even less dense. And so Preston Peak has 45% of all the vegetation, all the alliance, the Callitropsis alliance within California. And again, here's that massive stand on the north slope that we're going to get to this summer. So basically half of all Callitropsis are in or around Preston Peak. Here's a view to this is looking down Clear Creek. This is Preston Creek. You can see the Eclipse Fire. That was 2 summers ago, but how close it got to some of these stands, and fire is really beginning to impact the stands of a few of these stands in California. But because of the serpentine The spatially restricted microsites, I have high hopes that this is going to serve as refugia for a long time into the future. This is Cedar Ridge, which is an absolutely spectacular wilderness trek. Top secret. Just kidding. All right, so here's Devil's Punchbowl. This is where Julie and I surveyed last summer as well. There's a dense stand on the outlet, and then also some hanging stands high up, and then also with packed kind of densely within other conifer forests. But they tend to like these drainages or the edge of lakes. So then the Devil's Punchbowl, it's about a hectare, about almost 12% of California's Callitropsis. Here's one of these mixed stands. You can see fir spruce, red and white fir, and even Douglas fir. I mean, there's just amazing diversity. I think there's 10 species of conifers in this one little drainage just right here below the Punchbowl. But there's problems in the Punchbowl. It's one of the highly visited spots in the Siskiyous, and people are cutting it down for firewood. It's kind of grim. Here's another view. So we've been in talks, Aaron's helping with this, Aaron Lonergan's helping with this, but we're in talks with some volunteers that are going to go out and do wilderness patrols in the summer. They're going to ban, there's talk, needs to happen, fires need to be banned within the Devil's Punchbowl. Because this we can't be cutting down rare conifers for firewood, especially when you can't even burn it that summer when you cut it down. It doesn't make any sense. So anyway, a little bit grim, but this is, you know, one of the impacts that's happening. It's great people are getting into the wilderness, but we need to educate. All right, this is the southernmost stand. This is Elk Hole, which is accessed from near Orleans. And this is where we put in our belt transect. There's 2 trees right here, and this is the southernmost stand in the world. And I'll show you that, the impacts of a recent fire there. Here's a view down into Elk Hole. This is Sawtooth Mountain, beautiful spot. So here's the stands from above. There's a little tarn in Elk Hole, and basically the yellow-cedar right along the edge of the trail. The trail basically ends here, but stand in the thickets at the edge of that lake. So here's what this 2-tree stand looks like. If there is such a thing. And here's the main stand that we put in our belt transect. This is kind of what it looks like. This is what I documented as California's largest Callitropsis. Matt Ritter said we needed one, so I've measured that one, but I think there's bigger ones out there. But here's how we did the belt transect. It was really an interesting perspective from going from this thicket, right at the edge of the thicket, into basically a 3-tree white fir montane chaparral. Here's that dense thicket of Callitropsis. It basically keeps almost all other species from getting any traction whatsoever. And here's Julie taking some field notes on that belt transect. And here's that largest tree I was telling you about, the largest Callitropsis known in California. And then here's the very southernmost stand. So this was a 2015 fire that moved through. And I would say about 60% of this stand survived, but probably about 40% mortality. I'd have to check my notes. But I feel like this is, again, part of these natural cycles where some of these trees die, but how often do yellow cedar actually see fire? That's something we need to explore. All right, the Bear Lake Basin, these stands were known. This is actually a botanical area. These 2 stands were range extensions that I was able to find. There is a trail that kind of runs this ridge here. It's called the Kelsey Trail, an old gold miner Native American route from the Scott Valley over to Crescent City. And again, about almost a hectare within these stands. Here's a view down into the Bear Lake Basin. There's Preston Peak. Distance there. You see still snow lingering late into the summer. This was probably 2011 I took this. Yellow cedar hanging above the lakes, little glamour shots. This is a really interesting shot. This is one of those new sort of extensions I found. Here's the yellow cedar, north facing slope, south facing slopes all knobcone pine. So it's I mean, how often are you going to see this California close-grown pine growing next to this sort of subarctic species? It's really just, that's why I love the Klamath so much. And this is chinkapin Arctostaphylos in the understory, but this all burned 2 summers ago, and I haven't been back. I'd love to see how these Callitropsis were affected. Okay. All right, so it looks like I did a poor job timing here. A couple other stands I'll go through very quickly. And this is where we're going this summer. So this is that giant stand on the north slope of Preston. And then we're going to look in this area, Cyclone Gap. There are other documented stands within that area of the Klamath. All right, some of the places in the Red Buttes. Okay, so I'm going to end with this. This is the refugia idea, where these spatially restricted stands by the rocks probably will not see the impacts of fire. Like, how could fire potentially be vectored up into that area? And this is this little teeny stand in the Red Buttes. Just up, this is the Pacific Crest Trail, and Sayad Valley is down below. But these little teeny stands. So the good news, I think, for Callitropsis is that 74% of these stands, on my estimation, are within this refugia, the spatially restricted microsites. But some of them aren't. And this is Bear Lake, which is, we surveyed with the 6 Rivers. Tom Carlberg, that's here today, was part of this as well. But this fire kind of moved in and it burned the edge of those stands. So I've got all these identified places for the future, possibly more. And then just a couple quick thoughts. They reproduce well. Fire is going to be a factor, and new habitats being explored. They are moving upslope into these areas with decreased snowpack. So they're resilient, they're moving around. And overall, most of these stands are very healthy. So we've seen almost 0 mortality other than the fires. Okay, so we're going to do this work into the future and continue to fill in those big gaps in Northern California and the vegetation that's just really not mapped yet. So I'll leave it at that.